not be a quorum. I think we need 4 for a quorum.
Correct.
Dang it. Do we have anything that needs voting on today, or?
No, I think, I mean, the minutes would be the only thing. The Sports Park RFP was really just looking for feedback, wasn't looking for a vote on anything. And then same for the park naming policy, was mostly kind of looking to see what you all were or weren't interested in doing, and then, would act accordingly and come back at a later meeting with something for action.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay? Because I was having microphone problems before.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Well, since we don't have anything necessarily to vote on, I mean, I think we should just keep the ball rolling on a couple things. I know we've kind of punted on the sports park RFP a few times in terms of providing feedback. So I think it's good for us to still be able to have that opportunity. So I think we should just go ahead and call the meeting to order and do a quick roll call, which essentially is, in terms of members present, Swarzler's here.
I've got names written down.
All right, good, excellent. Do we want to do quick introductions for people, or?
Yeah, and actually, I should add. I guess I should make a quick comment about Patrick being here. So Patrick Bodley, if I guess I can kind of let him introduce himself in a minute here, but he's our library manager. I have completely forgotten your new title, actually, so you'll have to introduce yourself on that. But he's going to be, as part of his new title, he's going to be taking on more sort of parks and recreation work, which right now, the city doesn't really have a lot of parks and recreation programming per se. So it's something that's kind of going to be worked into, but things like the sports park, the future development, and then this committee seemed like a potentially good way for him to kind of be dipping his toe in the water and starting to get a little more involved in the city's parks activities. So
Great.
that's why he's here today. And Patrick, if you want to kind of give a little more background on yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been with the city. I've met a few of you either at the library or museum meetings or wherever. I started as the library manager in June of 2020 because there's nothing else going on in the world, so I might as well start a new job and move to Oregon, and did so. And then I guess end of November, right before city manager Pessimer left, they promoted me into this position that has existed, and my predecessor here at the library, Robin, she held this position of the official title, Sean, was Community Services Director, which I still am not used to, and still always just, I think my email signature still says library manager anyway. But basically what it is this position exists between the city manager and then library, museum, and parks having been vacant for forever, and someone needed to start signing off on museum bills and things like that their museum manager was doing. So I'm still actively the library manager, mostly day to day, overseeing the operations of Natasha at the museum there. And then we are working as a team, Sean and myself especially, but the executive team kind of have this group approach to where parks is at now and where we want to see it going in the future. So luckily we're kind of getting the ball running from the ground floor at this point.
Great.
Patrick, does that mean you're going to be the new Sean in this room?
No one can ever replace Sean, David, but I will, over time, he can come as a guest, but this won't be his responsibility to be the staff rep for these meetings. Yeah, I will be taking over as the staff, the city staff.
You making this change, Sean, because you're tired of me harassing you?
He's muted, and I don't think he's going to unmute for that.
Probably shouldn't admit, yeah, I know what he was saying.
So sometimes it's good to be on mute. Then you don't get your immediate response out there. No, I'm happy to have Patrick working, working his way in on some of this work. And then I know we also have or had Ann Sheck in as sort of not as a panelist, just kind of watching, I guess. And so, Ann, I'm not sure if you were intending to have like a visitor comment or anything, or if you were just looking to kind of tune in.
I don't see her in the, oh, there she is. I don't think you do. Okay.
Yeah, it's just that whole, you're sort of not, you can only watch until you're promoted into as a panelist. And so I think we can bring her in if she's got visitor comment, but I suspect she probably is just looking to listen in and may have even dropped off since there will be a recording afterwards.
All right. Well, thank you, Patrick, for the introduction. It's great to have you. Doesn't sound like we have any visitor public comments. So we will move it over to you, Sean, for staff reports.
Okay. So and yeah, I don't really have staff reports. I was mostly just going to be kind of talking about the new business. I don't have a particular staff report beyond that.
Perfect.
So I'll just roll right into the sports park RFP. So this, as you recall, has been percolating for a little while. I think you're all familiar with Independence Sports Park. It's the large property at the north end of town along the river where the boat ramp is. It's been envisioned as a kind of a recreational complex for quite a long time, as far back as the 1996 downtown development plans. Showed that as a kind of sports park ball fields usage. There's been a lot of kind of consideration of what to do, kind of what to do there. Ended up moving forward with a master plan that was kind of soccer oriented, and 3 of those fields have been built. There's been interest in just basically kind of seeing what may be possible to further diversify I'd say, kind of the sports field offerings or availability within, kind of the Independence Monmouth area. I know there's a lot of sports being played, and not only so many fields for all of them to play on. So there's been interest in seeing if we can essentially modify the plan for the sports park to fit in some other uses. And so, in order to do that, really wanted to kind of get a better handle on what actually was needed, and frankly, what would fit. So we decided to put out for a request for proposals to do essentially a feasibility study for the sports park. The idea being, and you can see from the RFP that was in the agenda packet, the basic idea was to take a hard look at kind of existing sports programs in the area, kind of what all is going on, how many teams, how many players, kind of what the current demand is, for lack of a better term, and take a stab at projected future demand. Try to translate that into sort of field usage in terms of how many fields do we need to accommodate those types of uses, and then take a look at the sports park to see if anything needs to be changed to accommodate wherever those gaps might be. And that's sort of, I'd say, in my mind, that's kind of the first half of this project. The second half really revolves around how to, sort of the costs of building and maintaining whatever fields are identified as being needed. And then most importantly, looking at operational plans for how other communities operate field complexes like this. In some cities, the city does it. In other ones, they contract everything out to a private or nonprofit organization. Sometimes they do mixes. They all kind of have their pros and cons. We want to kind of take a look at the realm of possibilities that we could do, and really try to identify a good operating scenario that we might be able to move forward with for whatever the ultimate, kind of ultimate design would be. So, I know this kind of the can got kicked down the road a few times with this request for proposals, and I wanted to get it out so we could get that ball moving. But I know I really wanted feedback from the Parks Committee about the scope of work to make sure, because I know we talked about it at least one meeting. And I think I incorporated those comments that I got, but I wanted to make sure that it sort of was all captured. This really was sort of meeting what you guys hoped for. And I would say, even though the request is out, we've actually received proposals and are in the middle of scoring. There's still time to, if there is something that was missed in the scope of services, there's still time to incorporate that in the scope, incorporate whatever was missed in the scope of services when we go to negotiate with whoever the ultimate consultant contractor will be. So don't feel like we've missed the boat here. I think there's still some opportunity to squeeze some things in, as long as it's not something that would, balloon the project cost, unreasonably beyond what a contractor might have otherwise expected. So with that intro, I'd be happy to answer questions, take comments, get your thoughts.
I have a quick one, Sean, or just, I guess, a point of clarification, because I know the city has a parks master plan, correct?
Yeah.
That I'm assuming that throughout that process, the community provided feedback, that kind of shaped the plan and provided input or feedback onto what types of sports fields. And I think even the Vision 2040 plan, right, also had some feedback to that. So I would imagine that the consultants would take a look at that also as a way of informing the layout or the options that could be provided with this.
Yeah, and I think anytime we do something like this, we usually start with our master planning documents, because that's, they've already been vetted by the public, they've been approved by the city council. So that's sort of the logical place to start from. Right. And then that's you start from there, and then you say, all right, what if any adjustments are needed, and kind of refine things from there.
And do you know how close ish the current configuration is to that original plan in the master plan document?
I would have to look, actually. I think the soccer centric one is actually what's in the parks plan.
Okay.
John, was that plan annexed to the comp plan? I don't recall.
Let's see. No, so I take it back. What I'm seeing here, and the plan was done in 2016. It looks like it's got kind of a mix of baseball, softball, and soccer, just kind of shown on there.
Okay. I'm just curious.
Yep. Sorry.
John, did you hear my question? I don't know.
I did not.
I was just wondering if I can't recall whether the parks plan that we did, what was it, 2014, 15, 16?
16 is, no, 15 is when it was adopted, July of 15.
Okay, so roughly 7 years ago. Whether that was annexed into the comp plan at the time or not, I don't recall if it's a standalone plan.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. I know the council officially adopted it, but I don't know if they just adopted it or adopted it into the comp plan.
In his process.
Yeah.
So can you, I was looking at the RFP, and I'm not sure, it wasn't clear to me, what is the geographic area that they will be planning across? Is it everything south of the Ash Creek Bridge? North of the Ash Creek Bridge, I mean?
You mean the geographic area in terms of the park, like the place where we might be able to put fields?
Well, what their study area is.
So my intended study area was sort of the Independent Sports Park complex. So there's sort of a city well kind of on the south end of the property,
right.
Basically that whole sort of 50-acre chunk.
Okay, so all told, everything within that area that has the wells north, south of the boat ramp road, and then north of the road.
Yes.
The existing and proposed soccer complex.
Yeah, and honestly, I would say that would be something that would be worth looking at as we get into this. Is like if we say, gee, we really need space for a t-ball field or a whatever. So for example, we might look at the Grand Street Park down there, which was kind of roughed in as a soccer field, but has never really been seriously used, that could be an opportunity for, to kind of bring in some additional space into consideration. But the initial focus, at least I would say, is on the sort of the main independent sports park area.
Yeah. Well, I know I expressed my concerns to you yesterday, and I'll express them for the group as well. I mean, the city has not got an abundance of staff, or maybe you're doing pretty well on resource right now. But at the end of the day, whatever you plan across and then start to build, you'll have to maintain.
Yeah.
And and I don't know what the 3 to 5 year or longer vision is for parks facilities and rec facilities, but I know at least two big major projects that you have in the planning works. You have a grant across the South Trail extension, which is a huge project in and of itself. And then you have, at least a preliminary planning work done on the main Riverview Park. Both of those are huge and substantial projects. And at least up until a couple of years ago, this particular project wasn't included because there was plenty of work on the table. And I know you haven't picked up recreation staff since then. So fill me in on how, I guess what I'd really, as much as anything, I'd like to see what that 3 to 5 year plan would look like. And I know you don't have that in place, but it seems like a work plan is what this group needs as it sort of assists the city in its, in getting to its vision of what the future of parks and recreation along the river is, not to mention everything in, interior of the city.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I think the intent of this feasibility study is to put some hard numbers to what currently is a conceptual conversation. I think there's interest in, being able to build additional baseball or softball fields. I think we've heard that consistently in community feedback as well, in terms of, a desire for more sports fields. So then, it's like, it's all well and good to say we need something, but you got to figure out what's it cost to build, what's it cost to maintain. And then you can start lining it up against other projects and say, okay, we can do this, but that means we can't do that. Or we could do 3 of these for one of those. That's where, at least in my mind, where this feasibility study will take us, is to get us to a point to say, okay, this is kind of the ideal mix of sports fields here. And here's about what it would cost to actually, build them all out, or even build a couple of them out. And then once they're built, here's the sort of the ongoing maintenance and operations costs. So before we're not going to just sort of build this and then or do the feasibility study and just jump right into building a field. We need to do this and then take a hard look at what those costs are, what's most efficient, what's most effective, and what are the sort of the top priorities for the community.
Well, I think it's going to come out in the wash, and it certainly did for us when we built those soccer fields in the first place. But back in the day when we put that project together, I think we'd had that conversation. There was a lot of pressure to go forward with baseball fields in place of soccer fields. I think when we did the Parks Master Plan survey work that Kate was talking about, I think it was pretty clear what the community preferred. But beyond that, I think it was also fairly clear that right now what we have is basically passive recreation opportunities. It doesn't require a rec director to run the park. It doesn't require a rec director to operate the trail system. It doesn't even really require a rec director to operate soccer fields. You just got to cut the grass, keep the irrigation going, keep it lined out. The teams come in and do it themselves. It's a wholly different level of operational requirement when you start talking about ball fields, baseball fields, or football fields I gather we're talking league play. So I anticipate the study is going to flesh that out and put it out there and say, maybe you can build it, but how are you going to run it?
Yeah.
And that would be it's a major concern for me, because one, I don't know that it hits the target for the majority of the community, but two, it's, because that's certainly not what the surveying work fleshed out when we did the work only 6 years ago. But there you go.
Yeah, no, and I think that, like I said, that's what I expect to kind of come out in the wash with this project. I do also, the other thing that we've always talked about and wanted to see happen is to be able to bring tournaments to the community, to bring outside people to town so they can spend money locally. that does require an added layer of operational infrastructure. And so that's, I think, for me at least, that's the other piece of this feasibility study is, I want to look at this and say, okay, yeah, our primary goal is to serve residents, to be so that they can have, a place to practice and maybe do leagues and whatnot. But where possible, we also want to be able to bring tournaments to town and generate revenue from some of these activities. It may make sense to have a city person directing that. It may make sense to contract that out and have the city get a cut, or maybe contract it out. They're just responsible for maintaining or further developing the fields based on the revenues they're able to draw. That's the kind of stuff that I'm hoping we can look at with this feasibility study.
And I guess I wasn't totally clear. Seems like the feasibility study studies what's possible and maybe studies need based on utilization, but is it also a study of kind of what the community is wanting? And if it's a study of what the community is wanting, if that's done before, I mean, it can be very respectful to ask the community what they want, but it can also be a little disrespectful to second guess if the community's already told you what they want and you're kind of questioning what they told you they want already. And I also just kind of second that I actually would support more programmatic and city involvement in programs, and if that's a possibility.
Yeah, and I guess I was not thinking that we would be going out and sort of surveying the community to say, do you want baseball? Do you want softball? Do you want soccer? All of the above, what have you. I was thinking of it more as a sort of see how many teams are out there, how many programs are out there, where they're practicing, where the pinch points are in terms of access to facilities, and sort of examine it from that perspective, basically. And, I don't know how much we'll be able to really realistically project growth in terms of, if there was an extra field, we could have, there would totally be 5 more teams or something like that. But ideally, we'd be able to get some kind of a perspective that way as well.
And is it a kind of a community-wide utilization as well? I mean, like, would it be looking at utilization of like the Henry Hill baseball
Yes.
field and if that's actually used and those kind
Yes,
of things?
this would be sort of like, okay, let's look at baseball. Where are all the baseball fields in Independence and Monmouth? Actually, this, in my mind, this is sort of a both community perspective. And so for each of the sports, you're sort of identifying how many teams, how many players, how much demand for field space, and how many existing fields there are. And so that way, trying to identify where those gaps could be.
I remain concerned that we've already surveyed this and the results are different. If we're not going to resurvey and see that what has changed, I'm not sure how we got to baseball short of the change in the council.
Well, and just anecdotally, I haven't done an official survey, but I walk around a lot and I see lots of soccer being played, but I walk by the baseball field a lot and I never ever see anybody out there playing baseball. But.
Well, I know the fields kind of by the skate park on the S curves. I know that they get used extensively, and I have some friends that do have kids in softball, and it is, I think, regardless of if it's softball, baseball, soccer, we generally have a lack of fields kind of throughout the Monmouth Independence area. And I think they've, even some of the groups are using the school properties, where possible. So I think that kind of collective view of what's kind of, if we cobble everything together, what's already out there, what can be used. And I agree, I don't want to see any one sport miss out. I know the soccer fields are very active and the Y has a good program with that. In fact, I think they're just advertising for getting some of the leagues started up again. So it could be a little bit seasonal also. And I think that's one of the things that the feasibility study will take a look at, if we have kind of spring opportunity for sports, summer, and then fall, and what does that look like, and how can some of these fields maybe be repurposed or even kind of collectively used and maybe striped in different ways.
There are multiple uses for the same field, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they take up a lot of space. I mean, obviously the fields do. So
Sean, is there still time? Is there still an option to squeeze in some kind of, I know it would be an extra cost, but something at the front end of the project, some kind of a community engagement effort that would at least test those, those changes in appetites?
I mean, yeah, I would think, because we do, I mean, obviously there was a certain amount of sort of outreach, that was, baked into the scope. So I think we can kind of talk to the consultant about, how they plan on sort of gauging demand for the various types of sports. And I think, I mean, if we wanted to do a survey, I think that would be pretty easy, because it doesn't cost a ton of money to do a survey.
Right.
Sarah, you had something?
Yeah, so I was in the meeting when we were going over kind of what they wanted to do. And actually the sports park was, I think it was like the top thing that people wanted from the city council. So that was actually something we all agreed on. And I know that there were people that took surveys, and those surveys were 5 or 6 years ago. Is that right? 2006?
Yeah, it would have been as part of the parks master
And
plan.
a huge amount of the people participating were college students, high school students, and Talmadge Middle School. So that was one thing that, yeah, you have that youth giving their opinion at that time, but most of them, I mean, I don't know if they stayed around after graduation, if they, aren't even in the community anymore. And so it's not necessarily that we're just disregarding, what people, it's just been several years, and a huge population that was, surveyed was kids. So I don't know if they're still here, or I'm not sure, but that was one thing we talked about.
Memory serves me, there's 1,000 responses to that survey work, and that's certainly far more than kids.
Yeah, that was vision. So that was Vision 2040. The Parks Master Plan was, if I recall, we had more like 400 or 500 kind of total participation.
And was that sent out to Western? Because they do like a massive email to all the kids, all the students.
Yeah, I don't remember the Parks Plan. I don't know why we would have done that. The Vision 2040, we might have. I don't specifically remember where the survey was sent out to.
I know that I think the transportation survey was sent out to the Western
Yes.
students because there's a relevant connection. I know a fair amount of the population of Western students will live here in Independence. And so they wanted to make sure that a Western student living here could give input on types of transportation over to Monmouth. But I'd be surprised, frankly, if Western would even send a Vision 2040 plan for Independence out on their network, or even like a Parks Master Plan. They're pretty somewhat regulated about the type of information that they send out through their campus-wide email system.
Either way, I think the point stands that it has been a number of years since the Parks Master Plan, and it doesn't hurt to go back out and verify, what we think is true. I mean, because if we're starting from the Parks Plan, and then go wherever it makes sense.
Well, and I certainly value the input from kids. so hopefully they'll be a part of whatever is done, because they will be major utilizers of the space, and it'd be nice to have their opinions and thoughts.
Yeah, it seems like the Parks Master Plan and the Vision 2040 documents would be a good launching point for the consultants, like you said, Sean. And then it seems like there would be a good, I don't know if it's midway or some part of the way in their draft report, be able to kind of showcase findings and then have people give input, at that point when they have something to respond to. That's
a good idea, because in the scope, I essentially have the consultants creating what I'm calling an existing conditions memo. And that's essentially, they go out and do a lot of sort of research about what's going on in the community. And then they essentially write up a memo and present that to us, saying, here's what we think the current situation is. And at a minimum, it would come to the advisory group, which I'm expecting the Parks Committee to be the sort of the core portion of that body. And if we wanted to, we could turn it into sort of a public open house type of a deal.
Can I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you envision that advisory group to work. And yeah, I'm sure that this Parks Committee, I would imagine, I would, but I imagine the rest of the Parks Committee would like to be actively engaged with that work. But the other piece of that is, I hope we're fairly white fairly male. It would be nice to, do a little inclusivity in terms of our community. I mean, we're 40% Latino and majority female. So it would be nice to get a little more balanced view. Well, we're not all, I'm sorry, Kate, we're not all male. My bad. Sarah, I know you're there. You're not in the committee. Anyway, yeah, I mean, just to be a little more inclusive and in all manner with this committee. Also, I'd like to hear, how substantial our role will be as an advisory committee going forward.
The basic, I think in the scope of work, I said there would be 2 to 4 advisory committee meetings. And in my mind, the advisory committee is all of the Parks Commission plus, 4 or 5, 3 to 5 other, other stakeholders or community members. And like you said, just looking
in that mix.
Yeah, we're just looking to kind of make sure we round out representation.
Yeah, I was just going to second that. I'm not sure we're necessarily representative of the community based on age, gender, ethnicity, many things. So
yeah, well, and even a parent with young kids, something like that. That I think that'd be good to have somebody on, who fits that bill. Because I don't count.
Well, and even some of the, like somebody from maybe the Y or some of the kind of sports groups that can kind of relate to their scheduling woes of trying to get sports field scheduled and not have kids playing at 10 o'clock at night and all that good stuff.
So to be honest, I kind of would like to keep them separate from this because, well, for starters, the Y is one of the ones who responded to the request for proposals, and I think it makes sense to have. I mean, they're sort of the program providers. You're right. They're sort of the ones who are most sort of scheduling to use the fields. I think we definitely will be. I guess I see us engaging them sort of separately. Like there will obviously be conversations specifically with the Y and with CYS to say, how much are you guys doing? How much would you do if you had more? Those types of things. So I'm not sure I want to mix it into the advisory committee.
Yeah, I think that's fair as long as they have a way to provide input.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I see them as being critical to the initial outreach.
So before you segue to the next item, I'm wondering, I have brought that up before about having some kind of longer term work plan for this group. Is there any chance that could get started, get on the agenda so we can kind of put in, get a sense of all the city's projects that are pending and how that's going to be sort of managed over time? Some kind of Gantt chart that would sort of spreads it out over several years.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing for Patrick and I to work up. Just kind of figure out how we want to line things out for this group.
I was going to see if you're going to volunteer Patrick for that.
Too easy.
Grateful to hear the "and I," Sean. That was really good.
But see, that's the trick, is you say "and I," and then you just don't show up to the meeting.
Your secret's out.
But yeah, no, I think we definitely could do that.
Patrick, somebody asked me how you became to be the community service director in the organization. I'll share that story with you. Or how the position came to be the community service director.
Yeah, that'd be good to learn sometime. Thanks.
So anything else for kind of scope of work for the sports park request for proposals?
So how many proposals were turned in?
We got 4.
Okay.
So that was a good, yeah, I actually was able to, it turns out there's a city Parks and Rec program association. And so I advertised it there, and apparently that was the right place to advertise it.
Good. And then do you have a sense of when you'll make a decision or?
Pretty quickly. Patrick has already gotten his scoring done. Fred's gonna be doing it. I'm gonna be finishing mine up. So I'm hoping we're gonna meet next week to basically just compare notes, and then see if any of our scores need to be adjusted. And then from there, if there's a clear number one, they'll probably be the chosen one. And if there's two that are pretty tight, we may do interviews.
Can you identify who the firms are?
I mean, I can name them. I don't have it handy. I will say the Y is the Y is proposing in a partnership with another organization or another company basically. And then the other three are actually out of state, I think kind of national firm type people.
Can you PDF and share the responses with us?
I'd rather keep the responses in-house. I'd be happy to share the names with you.
I've got names, Sean. Do you want me to read them off right now?
That'd be great.
Okay, so we've got the sports facilities companies was one of them. We've got the proposal from Dravis, which I believe is the one just based on what you just said. Sounds like they might be the one that was tied with the Y.
Okay.
Because they were local. Victus Advisors, and then Johnson Consulting. See who they're-
Johnson's the economist that we use for the.
Is Johnson? I hadn't actually looked at the address on that one yet. Is that one? Or actually, I haven't even looked at that proposal yet. Is that one from Portland?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's John. Okay, so that's probably the economist that we've worked with in the past. So, but yeah, so that's a good mix then, and I think good mix of local and national, and hopefully a good mix of skills. And so we'll see what shakes out.
Interested that you didn't get a lot of more traditional parks type designer type respondents.
Well, yeah, but this is less about there is a design component to it, but in my mind, it's more the nuts and bolts behind it all, the in terms of both the usage, but then particularly the operations and maintenance of it, and kind of how to make that work. Because I believe we actually asked for a 5-year pro forma of kind of projected operations to operate whatever the preferred kind of layout ends up being. So there was a fair bit of kind of numbers behind it.
Yeah, it says the probably the item that would have scared some of the more traditional design firms off is the conduct an operational, economic, technical, and programming feasibility study and market analysis. So that's probably where they looked at needing a different type of expertise or specialty for that.
And I actually did get called by a couple landscape architecture firms that we've worked with in the past. So I'm a little surprised that they didn't submit, but not super surprised.
Yeah.
Well, I'm assuming we're not building a stadium with a retractable roof or anything like that, which would have probably gotten a different feel. So
one of the out-of-state firms did ask me whether, kind of how big of a building and whether we're talking indoor facilities and stuff. It's like, nope, this is a floodplain.
Any last remaining questions on the feasibility study RFP?
Cool.
All right.
Moving on. So this was something we talked about in an earlier meeting, and it's I think something that's worth looking at. We've got a couple of new parks in town that I would say are beginning to become named for lack of having an official name. So for example, the park in Sunset Meadows subdivision. It's in our parks master plan as unnamed park, but I think a lot of folks are starting to call it Sunset Meadows Park. And then the park down in front of the hotel. Again, I think a lot of people are calling it Independence Landing Park, but that's not its official name. So I think there's an opportunity to create some official names for those parks if we would like. Because of that, I took a look at the, I essentially asked Karen what our process is for naming parks. And she gave me the Parks Memorials ordinance, which, if you've looked through there, it's kind of interesting because it does in a couple of spots reference naming parks or designating parks, but it really is about the creation of memorials and not really about park naming. So I mostly wanted to put this in front of you. You can see I grabbed a couple of park naming resolutions from other communities as well as examples of what we could do if we did want to go about naming some parks. I think it would probably be best to first suggest an actual park naming policy and get that adopted, and then use that policy to decide on some names for these parks.
The only thing I would suggest is on these park naming policies, I don't like seeing it named after living people. I mean, you look at how many Roger Jordan parks you get in Dallas.
I agree with that, and I think historically people become controversial at different times.
They're a lot less likely to become controversial if they're dead.
Oh, not necessarily.
This is true. This is true. Was there, so, there was a couple of, I'd say a good variety of examples. Cornelius, I thought, had a pretty straightforward, simple policy. Corvallis, not surprisingly, had a pretty extensive policy. Milwaukee was kind of the same. So I guess, do you guys have a preference? I mean, it seemed like they all sort of had the same base criteria, as David said, that, kind of the one thing that, I mean, the living person seems like the one thing that might be a little problematic. But do you have thoughts on either the criteria or just sort of the approach? Was there one city that you really liked their policy?
Well, in full disclosure, I worked on the Corvallis one. So there are some things I like about that one, but
I'm fine wherever you go as long as there's clear guidance. Do you see the Parks Committee being involved in is doing some of the grunt work when it comes to the naming, or this is just to get our input on the policy development? Well,
so that was, I mean, my thought is park naming should start with the Parks Committee, essentially that we should, and in this, of course, I think it was sort of explicit in at least one of the proposals that, if a resident comes to the city and says, hey, I think we should name this park or rename this park, after this person or thing, that should start with the Parks Committee, who then reviews it and then passes a recommendation on to the city council. So, in my mind, I think it's reasonable to, once one of these policies is approved, and assuming that it's allowed by the policy, for the Parks Commission to say, what, we think we should actually name a couple of these parks, and you can request staff to come up with some names or bring some names yourselves or what have you, but sort of, okay, here's a list of potential names, and we're going to zero down to what our recommendation is, and then pass that on to city council.
I think that sounds good. I think it may be useful to at least still have the opportunity for whether it's the Parks Committee or city or somebody to go out and to the community as a way for the community to vote or suggest names as well.
Yeah, and I don't think, and again, sort of, I think it depends on the policy that's approved, but I don't foresee that us creating anything that would prohibit that from happening. I mean, I think that's a logical step to take in something as significant as naming a park, to say, well, let's see, either we go to the community for suggestions, or we come up with our own suggestions and go to the community for their preference of those suggestions. I think that's a pretty easy step to take.
yeah, I mean, naming anything, parks or whatever, I mean, can be an expression of community values, and that's, I think that's the question of, I guess the first question is, do you want to express your community values through naming things, or do you want to just kind of stick with locations or those kind of things? Or, if you're going to express community values, what are those community values, and do we have consensus around them?
Yeah. And I think that's a good conversation to have when as we consider an actual policy, because decision criteria, you can you can exclude historical figures or locations, and just, it can only be street names, place names, geographical features, or you can bring in a lot more other things. So I guess I'm hearing you guys would like to see see kind of a proposed policy of some type. I guess the only thing I've heard so far is a general liking of the Corvallis policy, but with a little grain of salt.
I have no druthers,
Okay.
as long as there's guidance.
Yeah, and like I said, I think they were all, I think, substantially similar. So I'll just kind of go and see what kind of we can pull some commonalities and piece something together pretty easily, I think.
Yeah, usually most of them have stolen from others.
It's always funny when there's that, that common language that you recognize as you see different cities' policies. It's like, oh, that really got around.
Do you see the first work assignment being going back and look at the existing parks and either ratifying the names that are there or coming up with new names as warranted?
I guess personally, I would say we should start with the new parks that we know don't have names. I mean, pretty much all the other parks have been, I honestly don't know that there's a list of official park names, but if nothing else, those parks have been named in our parks master plans, this plan and the previous one. So from my perspective is those are fairly well-established names that probably shouldn't be messed with, without good reason, but I'll defer to your guys' thoughts.
Yeah, I think my 2 cents on that is, unless somebody has brought a name up as maybe being controversial or something, if we stick with the new ones, and then that would allow us to focus our time as a committee on, some other priority projects that we might want to do instead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess honestly, something else that we should think about is, there is, for example, the Grand Street Park below the dog park, or south of the dog park. That's another one that we call a Grand Street Park, but it's never actually been named. We can, there's probably a couple of those kind of places out there, and then if we want, we can look at, the whole river, sort of the riverfront, the couple miles of river frontage, if we want to declare a name for all of that. I don't know if it really needs one or not, but I think that could be talked about as well.
Well, and if a lot of them have kind of community established names, even if they're not official, I mean, I think there's some value to just endorsing that. And
that was kind of my, I'm not opposed to calling it Sunset Meadows Park or Grand Street Park, but just as long as we do it officially, it doesn't just kind of hang out there.
Yeah, if there's something that doesn't have a name, that's one thing. But if people kind of have a name for something, and I don't know if we have a compelling reason to try to get them to call it something different.
So, Sean, can I ask you a question? It kind of goes back towards the beginning of the meeting, but we may have covered a little bit. But I agree with everything. I think you've got some pretty good idea about the park naming. The trail going south.
Yep.
Does that grant include a review of that acreage that is just south of City Hall that has been designated as sort of semi-wilderness park for the city? So,
I mean, do you mean the gravel bar or the mainland portion?
The forested piece that is always, they've wanted Fortune 4 wanted to develop it and never could.
I mean, the grant we got to run the trail to the south is a design grant. So it will be looking at sort of essentially identifying the best alignment for that trail from where it ends at Independence Landing, all the way to the southernmost point. So it will sort of identify the best place to go through that portion of property.
Okay, so it's just a corridor, the trail corridor through the property, but not the entire property.
Well, I mean, it'll look at what's the best way to go through. It won't really, I mean, part of what we want to better define where the ownership lines are, with
Right.
regard to the best avenue for the trail, because that will help determine, do we just need a 50-foot easement, or is it really going to be better if we just try to acquire the whole property?
Okay, so my question then I guess goes to, does the city have any thoughts or has it made any movement on acquiring that property now that you have fistfuls of money to spend?
No, there has not been any conversation about that yet.
So it hasn't been appraised or anything to even know what it would cost or?
It is not. It is there's the properties, it's several tax lots. They have been listed for sale at one point for a rather hefty sum, considering the difficulty of building anything on that property. I don't think it's currently listed. So, but that, like I said, that's something I want to kind of get it nailed down better, and then that will give us more of a leg to stand on to look at what type of acquisition needs to be explored.
Any other, we've kind of moved into the other discussion information items already, but anything else that people want to bring up, or questions, ideas, David?
Always have something. I think at one time, tell me if I'm wrong, Sean, this was the tree board as well.
Yes, it is.
Do we still have an active Tree City USA program, and are we doing tree board work anymore?
Yeah, we are an active Tree City USA. The tree board has met a couple of times for street tree removal type of issues, but otherwise hasn't been too active that way.
Good. Now and then I see street trees removed, and I don't know where where they go for permission, or they just do it the typical way they do it out here.
Well, we did tweak the tree ordinance to essentially create an administrative process for street tree removal and replacement, as long as it meets certain conditions. So it could be because of that, or it could be, as you say, somebody just goes out there with their chainsaw and cuts it down.
Do they still have to replace with what's on the list, the approved list of trees?
Yeah, if you are not allowed to just remove a street tree without approval from the tree board. You have to replace it with an approved tree off of the street tree list.
Remind me, did we ever come up with a heritage tree program and a designated list of heritage trees?
No,
Got some beauties out there.
there are. I mean, that if that's something you all want to work on, that could be something for the work list. Pre-COVID, there was a botany instructor, I think, from Wu, who was working with us on an inventory of street trees, and was working on an inventory in the city parks. And that was kind of going to be an over multiple terms type of a deal. I think COVID kind of sank most of that momentum, but I can always kind of reach back out and see if there's still interest in doing that.
Okay. One of the trees that comes to mind is that tree over on 8th Street and right across from the bridge. That thing is legendary, and the contractors came awfully close to giving it too much of a haircut on its root system.
Yeah, and frankly, that's just we need to be more on top of things with Public Works.
And then I think it would be, so I agree. I think, taking a look at the heritage trees, I know I have probably one in my backyard. I think that would be interesting to do, or have some guidance around that, or make sure it's out there in the community for people to find. And then I think it would be interesting to look at the parks master plan and just kind of, maybe review sections of it at a time, just to kind of reorient or refamiliarize areas. And then I think from that, we could start to look at what are the most likely areas that are going to need, some investment of dollars in it to kind of revive it, or maybe new areas that are really lacking in that.
Well, So the other piece that somewhere in the future work plan, it'd be nice to have a conversation around a couple of different things. I mean, one, community gardens. I still think there's an appetite for that, so to speak. And two, somehow melding some of our climate change stuff with our urban forest. Start looking at some, our urban forest as a little bit of a way to downtake on carbon. Start helping you build a climate action plan of sorts, at least one element of it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Patrick, I think, would love to do that.
You what?
Patrick will love to do that.
That's why I'm here, David.
Has the city explored having like a climate action advisory group?
There is some kind of a group that I believe has formed. I actually don't know much about it. I don't know that I know it's some kind of a cross city thing. So I don't know if it's like an official city thing or if it's an outside thing that the city is supporting, agreeing with, or otherwise paying attention to.
Because it seems like there's intersections with parks and transportation and different things that the city's working on. So
Yeah. You're muted.
I tried the spacebar thing. So there is a climate change task force in Monmouth and in Independence, and they are working together. I don't know exactly where they are on things, but they did form those groups.
Do you know who they are?
I think you're Shannon Core. You would probably, I don't know who's involved, but she's kind of heading it. So
besides the person, I guess, is there an official connection to the city or for?
I think it's
advisory?
I think it's an actual. I don't want to say committee, but there's an actual city group.
Okay, great.
It might be a committee. I'm not positive what they ended up deciding.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Speaking of city committees, I feel obligated to make a quick plug for, we are looking for anybody who wants to help out with Independence Days. It is time to jump deeply into the planning. So and it's actually, I'm pretty excited about what it's going to be like this, that we're making some tweaks. I think it's going to be better than ever this summer. But it's definitely a big lift. So if you know anybody that wants to, wrangle vendors or help coordinate volunteers or otherwise, kind of just help put pieces together, we are always welcoming anybody who wants to help.
After years of scooping horse shit, I'm losing interest in that particular.
You could branch out.
That's the parade. That's the parade. That's not Independence Day.
My point of view, that was Independence Day. Back end of a horse and all the shit that we picked up.
Yeah.
Good
Well,
experience. Put on your resume.
That was day one for the city of Independence as city manager.
anything else for the good of the order? I think we've made it through the agenda. All right. I think we can adjourn.
Sounds good. Thank you all for coming tonight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Kate, and welcome, Patrick.
Thanks, everybody.